Are you dreaming of launching an herbal business? You should consider joining the Herbal Business Program brought to you by CommonWealth Holistic Herbalism. This course has it all: GMP, marketing, taxes, insurance, even building your website and getting comfortable with the tech you'll need to run your business. They break down every single task for every single aspect of your business, and they also provide you with very specific instructions on how to do it, with videos, pictures, worksheets, reference guides, and a lot more. For full details and to register, just click on the link in this podcast episode description. You'll get lifetime access, so it doesn't matter how fast or slow you go, which means you'll get to move at the pace that's right for you. And you can ask questions in lots of ways, including live and in person, twice a week, every week if you like. You can also send questions in writing, and they reply within 24 hours or less. That's very impressive. And there's a whole community of support too, so you can get lots of opinions. Also, you don't need to have any previous business experience. All you need is your herbal skills and a good idea, and you do the rest together. So one more time, to learn more about the Herbal Business Program brought to you by CommonWealth Holistic Herbalism, simply click on the link in today's podcast episode description. And Katja and Rin have been longtime supporters of Herb Rally, contributors, and today's episode is with Katja and Rin from CommonWealth Holistic Herbalism. So you'll get a good feel for their teaching style. They're super knowledgeable. They've been in the game for a very, very long time. So I think you'll really love and appreciate their approach to herbalism. So enjoy today's episode. And again, I highly recommend you check out their Herbal Business Program. Thanks, Katja and Ren, for your support as always. And I'll talk to you all later. Bye. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the show. The content in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to cure, diagnose, treat, or prevent any disease. This information has not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. We are not doctors, nor do we play one on the internet. Please seek advice from a qualified healthcare professional. Okay, MC Calico, take it away.
Yeah. Smoking herbal blends. We need some mullein and some kush, my brethren. While listening to Herb Rally podcast again. Herbalism at its finest with Mason Hutchinson. Yeah.
Meadowsweet, the friend to people with braces everywhere.
Or at least over here.
Yeah. Or people with ulcers, too.
Yeah, it's good for a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So
Wait, no, it's good out a whole bunch of stuff. It's a fantastic
it's good.
thing.
Yeah, it's good with a whole.
It's so hard. This is a good time for us to do a little reminder. Commercial here. It is so difficult growing up in this culture, growing up speaking this language, to remember that to say that Meadowsweet is good for a bunch of stuff is very exploitive. And we don't want to exploit our plant friends. We want to work with them. We want to partner with them. We want to recognize their talents, just like we do with our human friends and our animal friends. But it's so difficult to completely eradicate that grammatical structure from our speech simply because it's so common and it's what we were raised to say. Anyway, Meadowsweet is good at so many things.
All right.
And it smells amazing. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's say first of all, Meadowsweet here is in the rose family, and we can pull out our old favorite acronym, JARFA, just another rose family astringent. And you can apply that to Meadowsweet, but it definitely wouldn't do justice to this herb.
Oh no.
Honestly, it probably doesn't do justice to any herb, really.
And no, it doesn't do justice to anybody in the rose family. They're also wonderful.
But, I think most herbalists use it as a jumping off point to say, except it's also good for, good ass, all these other things, right? So, where to start with Meadowsweet? Well, probably with the salicylates, because they get a lot of attention. So, when you hear the word salicylate used in the context of herbal medicine, what that means is a compound, a chemical, that has as one of its elements or one of its components salicylic acid. And salicylic acid is often going to be found in herbs conjoined to other things. So in the case of Meadowsweet, we have here what's called methyl salicylate, where the salicylic acid has a little structure called a methyl group attached to it. In willow and in alder and different herbs, you find different salicylic acid compounds or different salicylates. So just a little bit of terminology there. And again, the one that we get in Meadowsweet is also found in wintergreen, and that accounts for the similarity in the scent that you find with them. A lot of times when people smell Meadowsweet for the first time, they say, oh, that kind of smells like wintergreen. What's that about? Well, it comes from this chemical being common to both herbs, and that provides maybe the majority or a large part anyway of the distinctive scent that we get with Meadowsweet is coming from methyl salicylate. So you can actually smell the presence of that compound right there in your herb. You can try that. So, let's see. So salicylates in general are pretty well known by comparison to aspirin. Plant salicylates are not the same as aspirin. Aspirin is its longer chemical name would be acetyl salicylic acid because it has an acetyl group attached to its salicylic acid content. And one of the things that happens there is that the acetyl salicylic acid, the aspirin, it can be irritating, it can be damaging to your gut lining, particularly in the stomach. So many people know that if you take too much aspirin or too frequently or too long, then you can develop a stomach ulcer as a result of that. And that's bad news. So let's not do that. Fortunately, when we work with plant-sourced salicylates, we're never at risk of that problem because these here, their salicylic acid is not released until the salicylates are processed or broken down by the body. Now, in the case of Meadowsweet, that happens a little more rapidly than in the case of, say, willow bark, which we're going to come to next. But even still, there's never been any indication and there's no physiological or pharmacological reason why you would still be at risk of developing an ulcer from your plant-based salicylates the way you are when you take too much aspirin. So that's nice, and that enables us to work with salicylate-bearing plants to deal with problems that aspirin wouldn't be appropriate for, or to work with them in people who have an existing ulcer or have a lot of inflammation in the gut or in the stomach in particular. And so that makes them a little more broadly applicable. The other thing that people get when they start to make this comparison between plant salicylates and aspirin is they'll want to think of the plant as like weak aspirin, or dilute or dirty aspirin, right? You're like, oh, it's got a lot of other crud mixed into there. How could it be anywhere as good?
All that other crud is really important.
Right, yeah. And with Meadowsweet, some of the important things that are coming through here, there are some anthocyanidins, which are, those broad-spectrum anti-inflammatories and usually have some influence on immune activity as well. There's lots of flavonoids in here, another class of anti-inflammatory compounds. There are compounds based on the element, the chemical called quercetin, and that is yet another anti-inflammatory with a whole separate mechanism of effect. And then finally in Meadowsweet we have a bunch of tannins as well, which contribute to its astringency. So all told, the overall effect of Meadowsweet is really distinct from what you would get if you were just taking salicylates or aspirin or that kind of thing. Here you're folding in multiple different types of anti-inflammatory or immune modulating effect, and you're getting some of that astringency, that tonifying, that tightening, that re-knitting back together effect that we turn to our astringent herbs to employ. So again, that's going to make this a lot more broadly applicable, and the amount of salicylic acid present in this or in willow or other things like that is going to be very small compared to an aspirin tablet. But it turns out that the solution to most of these problems, the best solution, isn't usually just throw a whole pile or a gram or whatever of one chemical at it. We find that a distributed attack is a lot more. I get a little militaristic there. Distributed approach is a lot more useful. Maybe we could work in a democratic metaphor here somewhere, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So all this was to say that when we're working with Meadowsweet for pain, whether that's pain that we're going to get the Meadowsweet directly into contact with, like when you have soreness or pain in the mouth or a toothache, or whether we're going to get that effect in the gut itself when there's inflammation in the gut, when there's ulcer, when there's inflammatory pain in here, or whether we're going to drink Meadowsweet continually and try to build up that anti-inflammatory and anodyne effect throughout the rest of the body, these things are going to be much more effective, we find, with Meadowsweet, and they're going to have less of a risk of side effects than using a pharmaceutical. So, like we always say, there's places where pharmaceuticals are totally appropriate, but for some aches and pains, for some gut discomfort, for some feelings of reflux or of acidity, Meadowsweet is oftentimes much, much better for those problems.
The interesting thing here is that, often people will turn to NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen for this kind of pain. And the funny thing is that really even one dose of an NSAID causes intestinal damage, right? And there's some amazing statistics around that. Most recently, I was looking at an article that noted that as few as 5 to 10 doses of an NSAID can affect fertility levels in women. So that's really fascinating to me. But
yeah, inflammation is necessary to the healing process, and when we just turn it off on the molecular level, like the pharmaceuticals are going to try to do, then there's always collateral damage, right? And there's usually damage, in particular to the gut lining, because it's inflamed most of the time. Honestly, even in a perfectly healthy person, your gut is turning over all of its tissue. All of those cells are getting recycled in the intestine, every 3 days, something like that. So there's a lot of overchange there that depends on an inflammatory process being present, controlled, right? Not excessive, but there and active the whole time. And when you throw an NSAID at that problem, or at that situation, then it turns that off, and now your gut starts to wear down, it starts to get degraded, there's not healthy tissue being regenerated. And so again, that leads to issues like ulcer, which can be really serious. And people die from bleeding ulcer from taking too much over-the-counter pain-killing drug, pretty frequently.
But then the funny thing is that here's this plant that is able to help manage pain, but also is actually beneficial to the digestive system, and is a plant that we intentionally work with for things like ulcers. So that doesn't mean that it's never appropriate to take an NSAID. There are times when that is appropriate, but I think it's really important to be empowered with the knowledge that even one dose of an NSAID is going to do intestinal damage, because we can fix that intestinal damage. We can encourage that healing, both with Meadowsweet, also with plants like calendula and plantain. And so if people had this knowledge widely in the public domain, then just like people now are starting to realize that if you take antibiotics, then you take probiotics after, we would do the same with our NSAIDs. We would say, oh, I'm experiencing some pain and I really do need to take some NSAIDs for that. And then when I'm finished with that, or even right off the bat, I'm going to start working with some of these plants that will help mitigate the damage to the gut.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, so in that regard, we're including Meadowsweet on our list of vulnerary herbs, wound healing herbs, where when we drink them internally, we're going to get that effect primarily through the GI tract. So to emphasize that, we just formulate. We put this together with plantain, or together with calendula, or all of them, right? And we really emphasize that particular aspect of its effect. If you drink Meadowsweet, and your body starts to process those things, they're going to have that effect on the gut as it's moving through there, being absorbed. And then these effects, particularly the salicylate effects, are going to be eliminated, or they're going to be moved down through the urinary system. So your body is really going to just be trying to get rid of the salicylic acid that you've ingested and the other compounds that are present in here, the flavonoids and cyanidins and all of those. And the excesses that aren't used, internally in the body are going to be eliminated via the urinary system. And so that means that Meadowsweet is going to have these anti-inflammatory, pain-relieving effects first on the gut, and then second on the urinary system. So this can be useful if you have a urinary tract infection and it's hot and inflamed, and maybe the tissue is getting a little bit lax. There might be discharge. There's these lax, hot, moist conditions present there. Meadowsweet again is cooling, drying, and tonifying, so it counteracts those tissue states, and it does it in this really targeted manner. So that's often what the presentation of a UTI is going to look like, and Meadowsweet is one that I think we we don't really give it to due all the time in our excitement about uva ursi, you know, or about cranberry juice or this or that. But this one is really worth considering for urinary complaints as well. Yeah.
Pardon the interruption. The show will be back on shortly. People will sometimes say, Mason, how can I support you in your work? There is so much free content on Herb Rally, and it'd be nice to give back somehow. I used to say, please rank and review the show. It means the world to us, which is still great. Please rank and review in your podcast player of choice. But now I'd say becoming an Herb Rally Schoolhouse member is one of the best ways you can support our small family herbal business. If you've ever heard of Patreon, it's kind of like that. Basically, you're directly supporting our work by spending $10 a month and becoming a member of the Herb Rally Schoolhouse, or patron, if you will. Membership includes exclusive content, and we release new content each week. And the library of available content just keeps growing over time with a variety of teachers and classes, which means the schoolhouse just keeps offering more, adding more value to you as you continue on your herbalist journey. There's also a bunch of discounts for cool herbal businesses in there as well, plus some other features to the membership. So if you'd like to check it out and get your first 30 days for free, you can use coupon code PODCAST when you register at herbrally.com/schoolhouse. Again, that's herbrally.com/schoolhouse and use coupon code PODCAST at checkout to get your first 30 days for free. Thanks so much for your time and support. Now back to the show.
Hey, back to mouth pain.
Yeah.
So Meadowsweet has been great through my experience so far with orthodontics, and we really looked at the chemical structure of the different salicylate herbs when we were thinking about how do we want to experiment with managing the discomfort of having braces. And Meadowsweet was at the top of that list specifically because of that methyl group there on the salicylic acid, because that is easier to absorb through the skin, or in this case the gum tissue, than the chemical structure, the molecular structure of the salicylates that are in willow. And so that has borne out. That experiment has borne out, and
It's basically that the methyl salicylate is a fairly small molecule, all things considered, and in willow you get this other compound called salicin. So the salicylic acid is joined to something that's a much larger add-on, right? And that makes it a little more difficult for your mucosa to absorb or to be broken down by like salivary enzymes or enzymes that are just local to the tissue. So when you take willow internally, it kind of has to all circle down to the liver before that can start to be freed up, and now the salicylic acid can exert its effects. But yeah, so the theory was, and it seems to be borne out at least in experience here, was that the form of salicylate that you get in meadowsweet, wintergreen, that's going to be more readily absorbed and have a more immediate topical effect. Certainly we observe that with wintergreen oil. If you get wintergreen essential oil and you work with that, that's largely comprised of methyl salicylate, and that stuff absorbs really well. We'll often turn to wintergreen in a liniment to drive that formula deeper into the tissue, to penetrate, and it works really nicely for that. So it's another kind of piece of evidence pointing in this direction.
Yesterday, actually, or Monday, one of the pharmacy students came and he plays basketball, and he said, I don't know what it is, but at least once every couple months I get a basketball right in my mouth. Not the whole ball in it, but it's hit on the mouth with a basketball. And so he came to me and he showed it to me, and he had this like big cut inside his mouth, and his lip was puffed up, and it looked really painful and uncomfortable. But this particular student is really, really data oriented. And so he was able to tell you like his average healing time and all the protocols that he's ever tried to heal. And I'm just like, I love this guy. This is like the third time that he's presented such an issue with all that kind of data. It's great. So I said, well, gee, is there anything that I could try herbally? So I made him a tea of calendula, plantain, and meadowsweet. And I said, listen, don't drink it, because the cut was right on the lip, right? So it's in the front of the mouth. I was like, if you just drink it, you're not getting the medicine to the tissue that requires it. It has to go all the way through the bloodstream, and it's going to take forever. So I said, anytime that you're just sitting around, watching a game, doing whatever, then make yourself a cup of this and just hold it in your mouth until you have to swallow, and then get some more and hold it in your mouth again. So really that same night, he had to write to me and say, this is amazing, this is healing faster than, it's already faster than anything I've ever done. I'm like at the day 5 point, and he's totally tickled. He came today, and the healing is so much improved. I should have taken pictures. Yeah. But he's a good kid. He'll document all of it, so that'll be great. But it's just really, it's hard to overestimate how effective these things can be, and especially because we live in a very conventional medicine world, and we all were raised kind of attuned to that, and we sort of, oh, well, you know, herbs will sort of, maybe they'll kind of, I'm making a compromise because I want to be natural, but, you know, I'll put up with it if it takes longer or whatever. And that's not really the case. So I'm for collaboration. And for me, the first step of collaboration is, do we even need those chemicals? Because a lot of pharmaceuticals really are actually miracle drugs. If we use them every day, they're not going to work we're just going to build up resistance to them. So anytime that we can do this, it's fantastic. And in his case, it's just great to see how quickly this is going, especially in comparison to his own data about how quickly or not it has healed in the past.
Yeah. Nice. There is one effect about Meadowsweet that I wanted to mention, and you'll see this I see this in most Materia Medica entries for this herb, where amongst its actions is listed the term antacid. And I'm not really sure what's going on with that, to be perfectly honest. This is just a thing that today I was kind of spurred, because I knew we were going to teach about this tonight, to dig in a little bit more. I looked for any mechanism that somebody had documented whereby Meadowsweet would actually reduce the secretion of stomach acid from the lining, and I haven't really found that yet. So I'm going to keep looking. I've asked a number of other herbalists to give me their opinion and their data on that. My current theory is that probably what's going on is that the relief people are experiencing from heartburn or from GERD or from other acidic related problems is probably more to do with the anti-inflammatory, the astringent, and the cooling effects of Meadowsweet, rather than like directly turning off or neutralizing acid in the way that calcium carbonate or whatever would accomplish.
But because that's what everyone is familiar with, that's what they're equating it to.
Yeah. So I mean, many people who have heartburn, their problem isn't too much stomach acid; it's actually too little. And there's lots of reasons why that's going to take place, and when we get to digestion, we'll talk about that in a lot of detail. The really short version is that for many people, they need to have something to soothe and to calm the inflammation and the irritation that's already been caused, and then we need to do a reset where we're going to work on the gut flora. We're going to restore stomach acid production to more normal levels. Make some changes to movement habits, but these are all going to add up to a reduction in pressure in the system, and that causes things to stop being pushed upward, which is where the heartburn's really coming from. So it seems like the utility of Meadowsweet in these cases is more to do with those anti-inflammatory effects, with that reduction of heat in the stomach, and that astringency and the vulnerary activity that help to heal and to tighten up lax tissue that can be contributing to the pain somebody's experiencing. So that's my current take on all of that. I've got a little digging to do, but as far as I can tell right now, there's no particular reason to think that Meadowsweet is going to be in there actively neutralizing stomach acid the way you get with Tums or something, which makes me feel better about it, actually. The first time I was really kind of started to think about this, I was like, well, wait a minute. I don't really want to reduce stomach acid in most people because their problem is too little to begin with, and if I'm actually going to reduce it further, that could worsen their problem or make it go on longer. We definitely see that with the acid blocking drugs. So that's my current take on this issue. We'll update you if we get any new ideas about that.
And we'll spend a lot of time talking about this when we talk about the digestive system, because it's counterintuitive, but it's also fascinating and awesome.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, the other place that Meadowsweet is decently well known for activity is in the reproductive system. And so this is primarily, Meadowsweet being employed for cramping pain and difficulties with, the menstrual cycle and things like this, which I can't really speak to very much. But I will say that when we're going to employ it for those purposes, it's going to be done in a formula. You kind of have to give it some friends to push it in that direction. It won't really just go there under its own power. So if you put Meadowsweet together with raspberry leaf, then the raspberry has that strong affinity for the uterus, the reproductive tissue, and it kind of drives it there. Probably even better would be lady's mantle. Lady's mantle and Meadowsweet are really similar in a lot of ways. They both have salicylate content. They're both cooling, drying, tonifying in nature. And the lady's mantle is really going to draw the Meadowsweet over in that direction. So yeah.
Of course, I need to add that I would add ginger into that as well.
Of course you would, yeah.
Yes, because
you can just picture like somebody really hot and moist all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I would appreciate the drying and tonifying action. The cooling action would not necessarily feel great in my body. So I think that's a fantastic, foundation there, the Meadowsweet and the lady's mantle, but I'd be tossing some ginger in there as well, just because my body likes it warm.
Yeah. So this pairing with friends thing with Meadowsweet is particularly apparent with this herb. It's true with lots of herbs that you put them together with a friend, and now that emphasizes one of their particular talents. But with Meadowsweet, you can really move the center of gravity for its anti-inflammatory effects from the gut, with plantain and calendula, to the urinary system with goldenrod, to the reproductive system with lady's mantle, to the joints with Solomon's seal. There's lots of different ways to direct it here or there, and that does make it very versatile, and that we find that very handy. Yeah. Well, we tend to work with the flowers mostly these days. Your herb supplier will sell you Meadowsweet leaf as well, and we use that sometimes.
Much less these days.
As time goes on.
Yeah.
We've kind of come to find that the flowers are the most potent. So
at least the most delicious.
They definitely have more of the scent and the smell and the flavor and taste that you want. So
it is worth also noting that as you look at these, and I'll put a picture for comparison. But they're just pretty tiny yellow flowers, and as you're looking at your dried herbs, it becomes kind of difficult to tell it apart from some of the other pretty little dried yellow flowers. They're actually usually white flowers, but once they dry, they're yellow. For example, they look super similar to elderflowers. It's almost impossible to tell them apart until you open the jar and smell them, at which point it's super easy to tell them apart. And so just like we talk about learn your Latin names right straight from the beginning, also start learning to differentiate your herbs based on sight and smell and taste right from the beginning. And so go ahead and sit yourself down with a jar of elderflower and a jar of Meadowsweet and even some yarrow. Yarrow doesn't look really quite as similar as elder and Meadowsweet do, but it's still confusable. And smell them, taste them, and really use your other senses to help you learn to tell them apart. And all those things will make you a better herbalist, if for no other reason than as we're preparing right now to go to West Virginia to do free clinic work, we've been receiving donations from students and graduates and people in the community. And in some cases, labels fell off. People would bring boxes of things, and in some cases, the labels fell off. And being able to identify stuff based on the senses, sight and smell and taste, and feel very confident about what you're identifying is actually super tremendously useful skill.
Yeah.
And it can absolutely be developed, right? These are things that we don't really use in modern living. And even that might be a little bit difficult and very challenging initially, especially if you're a person who maybe eats a lot of Doritos, which there's no shame in that. I used to love cheese Pringles. So if that's you, there's no shame. But things that have really intense artificial flavors like that burn out your taste buds and make it difficult for you to differentiate flavors. Flavors represent chemical content, right? Organic chemical content. And so, we sort of just think that a flavor is just something that goes on top, like that weird orange color powder stuff on the Doritos. But it's not. The flavor in real life is indicative of specific chemical content. So it's really worth developing that skill. But like a muscle, you can't do it overnight. You can't do it the first time that you try it. You need to, or like learning somebody's name. Maybe you're great at learning names, but most people need to have repetition a few times and sort of see the person again and remember their name and talk to them. So definitely do those exercises. And if you have kids or a spouse or roommates, then they love to blind test you, and so you can get them to like turn all the labels around, and then you can guess, and they can tell you if you're right or not. And that's always a game that makes them either delighted when you get it right, and they don't know how you possibly could have done it, or they like to laugh when you get them wrong, because friends can be helpful that way.
Everybody wins.
Yeah. But definitely spend time working on that with all of your herbs.
All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to stay up to date on all things herb rallies, such as upcoming Herbalism events, new monographs and podcasts, etc., I'd recommend you sign up for the Herb Rally newsletter, and you can do so at herbrally.com/newsletter. We send it out about 2 times a month, sometimes less, sometimes more. Really depends on whether there's a certain program we're promoting, that kind of thing. But yeah, to stay up to date on Herbalism events and everything else going on here at Herb Rally, subscribe to the newsletter. That's herbrally.com/newsletter. So thanks again for listening, and until next time, take care.